Okay, so let's go through section 1.3, reproduction of seed plants. So first, a plant's life cycle. So just like humans, plants have a life cycle. So plants start as a seed, young plant, seedling. They mature into a growing up plant. They flower. They might produce a fruit or not. I guess they're just the flower. And then the fruit has the seeds grow, and so on and so forth. Just like, humans, we're babies, toddlers, kids, you guys, you grow up into an adult, then you may or may not have a baby yourself, which will then grow up, and then we get this cycle. So that's a plant's life cycle. Today we're going to go through the different parts of the plant's life cycle. So first, the seed stage. So the seed, remember, has three main parts. It has the embryo. That's the part that will actually grow into the new plant. It's like a fetus. It's going to grow into a baby. Then it has everything to protect and nourish the seed. So there's that food store in there that's going to nourish that embryo until it can survive on its own. That's why animals, humans included, eat seeds. They are rich in nourishment. And the seed coat is a strong outer that's going to protect the embryo. So it's going to protect it and nourish it, and then the embryo itself. Three things. The seedling stage, much like the youth stage, the plant is growing very fast. Think of how much a baby changes in a year, 2, 3. It's growing up very quickly, and it's going to begin to produce its own food through the photosynthesis nutrients in the soil. So it's starting to leaf, it's going to break through the dirt. It's a cute little seedling. Change is happening very quickly. And your adult stage is when the plant produces those reproductive structures. We'll look at those today. But that's typically your flowers or your cones. So when the plant is ready to create new plants, it is considered an adult, the flowers or the cones. So let's look at this adult stage. So pollination. This is like a fertilization if we're thinking humans. Pollination is the process where the male and the female parts of the plant will join to produce a seed. So pollen is the male part of the plant. Pollen is the reason for some of your seasonal allergies. So once it is indeed spring-like outside, pollen is going to be in the air. If you go for a walk in the river valley, you see these big white fuffies. Those are the pollen. It's small, sticky cells, and a plant produces millions of pollen grains and releases it often into the air or with the help of pollinators that we'll talk about shortly. So, if you have seasonal allergies in the springtime, that's what that is, the male part of the plant. The ovary is the female part of the plant, and this is typically in the flower. So every flower has one ovary, usually at the center of the blossom. So in this case, right here. The ovary will contain an ovule. An ovule is basically the egg. So that is the female genetic information. So your process of pollination. So the pollen grain will land on the stigma of the flower. Stigma, you go back, is this. So the stigma is going to be something that sticks up from the plant. Tulips have very clear stigmas. The pollen grain then produces a pollen tube that grows down to the ovule, which is in the ovary. Pollen grains transfer to the ovule and it grows into a seed. So, I'm going to draw this for a sec. So if this is my stigma, and it goes down into the ovary, which I'll draw here with the ovule. Then what happens, change color, the pollen will come in, it'll land on the stigma. Blue dots are the pollen, red is the stigma. The pollen then needs to make itself a tube. It will bury itself down through the stigma until it reaches the ovary and finally the ovum. So this ovule here with the pollen in it is the full process of pollination. So sometimes plants get help. So many plants first are pollinated by the wind, but pollinators are animals. Those are organisms, living things that carry the pollen from one flower to another. So these are things like bees, hummingbirds, butterflies, dragonflies. We got this win-win relationship with the organism and the flower, the plant. Cones. We looked at this at the beginning. Cone-bearing plants are a little different in terms of their male and female parts because they don't produce flowers. So the male cones produce pollen, the female cones produce the ovules. Once pollinated, the seed will develop on the female cone. This picture here is showing the differences. So this here, the longer, skinnier cones are the male, and the shorter and fluffier cones are the female. Sometimes plants don't produce with two. Sometimes one plant can create multiple other plants. And we call this vegetative reproduction. So vegetative reproduction is a reproduction of seed plants that does not involve the production of seeds. So these plants will be genetically identical to their parents. They will be a clone of their parents. There are different types of vegetative reproduction. So you think of raspberries or strawberries. These are my favorite example because they're also my favorite plant. So if you plant a couple raspberries, leave them for a couple of years, you're going to get more coming off of them. Right? They're going to start, making their way under fences or outside of the garden even. A couple feet away, you'll get a new plant. We'll talk about that. So that is a runner. So this is things like strawberries. They are long stems that grow on the surface and produce new plants. Remember it because you run on the surface of the ground. I know, crazy stuff, right? Anyways, runners are going to be on top of the ground. You guessed it. Our next one, produce underground. So there are rhizomes. They will form underground stems and produce new plants. So here is your rhizome. It's the same idea as a runner, but it is underneath the ground. And then we have this whole sort of category, bulbs, tubers, and corms. They are underground stems produced close to the plants. Right, the other ones, they're still sending it away, a good couple feet. But these bulbs, tubers, corms are all produced very close to the plant. So these are things like potatoes. Potatoes are a tuber. They're growing right off of it. Onions and garlic. Tulips. And if you're planting tulips, you don't plant tulip seeds. You don't buy tulip seeds. You get tulip bulbs. That's important. That's a different type of reproduction. They also do produce seed sometimes, so plants can have both. It can be vegetative and a pollination. So suckers, these are new plants produced from the roots of the parent plant. Right? And it's from the roots because roots suck. Right? They suck things up, water, nutrients. It's produced from the roots of the plant, not the stem. Roots suck. Right. Then we have a couple other types. We got this technological vegetation. Technological means that humans have interfered. So it might not seem very technological to you, but if you had to do it, we call this technological vegetative reproduction. The plant doesn't do it naturally or on its own. So one common example is a cutting. So a cutting is when you literally cut a piece of the plant, like a stem, not even a stem, a branch, etc. It doesn't have roots. Then you plant it. You might put it in water first, and it will produce its own roots and will continue to grow. You have cut a piece of the plant off, and it is going to grow itself. These plants are still genetically identical because, of course, it is the same plant. And grafting. This is kind of a weird one. It's where you create a new plant from multiple other plants. It's like a Frankenstein. You're just going to attach part of one plant to another plant, and then it'll grow. Right? So you might have an apple tree, and on one arm it's red apples, on the other it's green, and another is pears. So you can do this with similar types of plants, but it'll then produce different fruit. Each part of the plant keeps its different parts to it, its uniqueness. And there you go. That is a quick rundown of the different types of ways that plants reproduce. If you haven't already, you should finish up these check and reflect questions. If you have any questions, ask. Always ask. All right. Have a good day.